because it's time to go local, Rev. Now, this is what has had people going crazy here in this city for the last week or so. Let me start from the beginning here on HB 1187. Gary legislators have been alarmed at a bill that would get rid of the teachers union and let the state appoint the school board.
Yeah.
Right. As the district nears financial stability, a guidepost for taking over the takeover that started in 2017, efforts to plan the next steps are becoming more prominent. This week, Republican members of the Indiana State House introduced a bill in response to returning local control to Gary residents. HB 1187 calls for measures that have inflamed Gary residents and their state representatives. HB 1187 would end union representation for Gary teachers. It would return financial and academic matters to a school board appointed by the Indiana Secretary of Education. On last Friday, a group of school parents and residents gathered at the office of the Gary Teachers Union to talk about ways to oppose the bill. The GTU president, Gleneva Dunham, said that the union will fight the bill, which I'm expecting them to. A delegation of House and Senate members representing Gary spoke about the bill on WLTH Radio this Saturday. Representative Vernon Smith, State Senator Eddie Melton have served as non-voting members of the Distressed Unit Appeal Board, the Indiana agency that manages the school district with its day-to-day operating partners, MGT Consulting and Gary Schools Recovery. After December 31st, 2021, HB 1187 states, an exclusive representative of the Gary Community School Corporation may not enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the Gary Community School Corporation. Excuse me here. If enacted, the bill would prevent GCSC manager Paige McNulty from negotiating with the teachers union for another contract. After June 30th, 2023, the bill states Gary school employees may not form, join, or assist school employee organizations, may not participate in collective bargaining with school employees through representatives of their own choosing, and may not engage in other activities individually or in concert to establish, maintain, or improve salaries, wages, or salary and wage fringe benefits. The bill gives authority to Indiana State Secretary of Education to appoint a 7-member school board. Now listen to this. 5 of the members will be named by the Education Secretary. Wow. Let me say it again. The bill gives authority to the Indiana Secretary of Education to appoint a 7-member school board. 5 of the members will be named by the Education Secretary. The 2 remaining positions will come from a list of candidates submitted to the Education Secretary by the Gary Mayor and the Gary City Council. 4 members of the school board must be Gary residents. School board members will serve 4-year terms. Now, this man here is the author, Representative Tim Brown from Crawfordsville, who has turned into sort of like who I've heard his name so much this week. He's like the Skeletor of he's turned into Skeletor here in Gary, and chairman of the House Ways and Committee, and Representative Jeffrey Thompson from Liston. Brown also authored HB 1315, the 2017 bill that created the state takeover because the district could not pay its bills. Take of the school district will end as defined by HB 1315 when the district maintains financial stability for 2 consecutive years. The district ended 2021 without a deficit, meaning it balanced its budget, paid its bills without borrowing, and is expected to do the same this year in 2022. Now, under state control, the district's yearly deficit was cut from the $18 million it had in the $18 million deficit it had in 2017. Well, this is wow.
You know, I'm actually hoping to interview Representative Brown.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because if nothing else, you know, as a news disseminator, it should be our goal to get as much information as thoroughly as possible to the community so that they are making sound decisions. Right now, let's be honest, we got the document and we got an interpretation of the document that's largely from people who are other than the creator of the document. Nobody that's interpreting this bill to us speaks, you know, along the lines of the creator of the document. Now, that's not saying that they're wrong. It's just saying that they're telling us what this bill means. But that's no different than I read the bill, and if I were to read the bill, and I have, and then I took some notes, and I did, and then I were to tell you what I think the bill is talking about. I might be right. I might be wrong. Now, as a commentator, that's perfectly fine. As a journalist, it would be at very least short-sighted of me not to get information from the author's mouth.
Right, the source.
You know, why he wrote this bill. What is the problem that this bill purports to solve? What is the issue that this bill purports to resolve? I'm uncomfortable with simply reading the bill, dismissing it as racist, and then they're attacking it. You know, I don't know this man,
right,
for good or for ill.
Right.
I do know that, as you pointed out, he was the author of the bill that put us into this receivership. But I've had people call into the radio station. Not I've had them, but people have called into the radio station who said that he didn't do that on his own. That there were people from this area who went down to Indianapolis and presented the situation and requested, urged, what have you, that the Indiana State Legislature do something to help the Gary Community School.
Right.
So it's not like he just came up, you know, out of the clear blue and decided, you know what, I've got nothing better to do today. Let me mess with those folk up in Gary.
Well, see, go ahead, Rev.
And then I'm gonna pause for you to comment on this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the way we're going about it right now, and I agree. When we do speak, we should speak together. But right now, we're still digesting this bill, and we're at the stage now. It's almost like if you don't say what the teachers union said and what some of our elected officials are saying, then you're like the people that don't want to get a COVID shot. It's that, you know, the pressure's on that hard. Look, at the end of the day, I've got my questions about this bill. I've got concerns with this bill. But my biggest concern is right now, if I were a person considering moving to Gary, Indiana, and one of the things I noticed is that, hey, the school district in Gary, Indiana is under state receivership. There must be something wrong with the schools in Gary.
Right.
Now, so to the extent that this bill does not move us out of receivership, I have a problem with it. If this bill, on the other hand, moves us out of receivership in a clearly articulated way, I could support it. But right now, I don't see that pathway from this bill. Now, maybe this bill does not address that issue because that issue is being addressed in that other bill that you mentioned from 2017. Maybe that issue has already been addressed. Maybe we're actually halfway out anyway, and maybe the only thing this bill does is say, okay, this is the way we shall process this. Oh, and the other thing that that people have taken issue to is the issue of an appointed versus an elected school board.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, we don't have a school board. We have an advisory board. Now, maybe those people will get elected under normal circumstances. Maybe they would be elected to transfer from being the advisors to become actual board members exercising authority. My biggest concern has always been that when this thing ends and control is returned to Gary, who will exercise that authority? How will we determine the people who exercise authority? Who has enough knowledge to be able to set up the, if you will, the job description of the board, of the trustee board?
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be better than it was before. We can't just throw something up against the wall and hope that we get a better outcome if we don't have an idea of what a better outcome looks like, other than that, well, we just don't want to end up in debt.
Right.
And we haven't had that conversation for the past 5 years of how do we get to self-governance, and what should self-governance look like, and what should be the terms under which we select people to fulfill those jobs. I haven't seen that conversation. I haven't read that conversation. And I fear that just because we pay these bills off, it'll be no different if you got a $20,000 of consumer debt and you hit the lottery. And so you pay off all your consumer debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we got a whole bunch of money because of COVID, right?
Right.
And the bond. We voted for the bond. So we got all this money so we can pay off the state. But what if we haven't actually learned how to manage a budget?
Right.
Or rather, what if we haven't learned how to elect people who we know will properly manage a budget? So then we pay the bills off. The state says, okay, well, you're free to go on your way. You fulfill the conditions. And then 5 years later, we're right back in the same hole. I would be pissed.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I feel you 100%. I know a lot of people are just saying that that it's like it's solely racism. I agree that to an extent that Gary is not trusted to take care of its own business because we're a black city, at least partially. But I look at it as more of Gary is actually a neoliberal test. Okay, we've seen this for the last 40 years. It's really starting with the Reagan era, especially, of destroying the public sector, unions, labor unions across the board, starting with the air traffic controllers back in the early 80s. But if you ever notice, conservatives are always trying to, a lot of the right wing is always trying to the scapegoat teachers unions. We see it now. Now, even though I disagreed with the Chicago Teachers Union about them not wanting to have school, I do respect that they are a union, and I respect that they collectively decided at that point to stand together. We know that the right wing has always resented that. They've been pushing charter schools. Gary, Indiana actually has we are sixth in the nation with the number of charter schools per capita. Sixth in America. The goal has been to destroy public schools, push charter schools, and I mean even things like NPR and other, the public commons, things that are educational. And we're going to talk about this other education bill here in the state of Indiana, where it's supposed to be focused on things like critical race theory or whatever. But this sort of push for charter schools, push to bend teachers' unions over a barrel. I look at it as Gary is the perfect place because it's perceived as a black city that people don't care about that much. Right. That people don't really care We're a city that has been pretty much, let's just be honest, in decline for about 50 years. You know, our population, especially, we're under 70,000 now. That definitely.
But even with that, you know what?
Right.
At around 70,000, we're still either among the top 10 largest cities in terms of population,
right,
or just outside the top 10.
Yeah, I believe we're. I have to see exactly where exactly we're ranked. Yeah. We're still somewhere. We're at. I believe we're at the bottom of the top 10 in terms of in the state of Indiana. I believe we used to be a second or third at one point.
We were second.
Yeah.
The only thing bigger than us was Indianapolis.
Right. It's the 9th largest city in Indiana.
Yeah.
And so the 400. Yeah. Go ahead.
Even with all the losses we've suffered, we're still bigger than almost every other city and town in the state of Indiana.
Right.
And we're the only chocolate city, you know, if borrowing from that old song by Parliament.
Yes, yes.
We're the only chocolate city that is almost pure chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta is actually, it's I guess the phrase I'm looking for is it's multicultural.
Yeah, it is.
I said Atlanta. Washington, D.C., multicultural. L.A., multicultural. Compton, multicultural. Philadelphia, multicultural. Gary, 90% plus black.
Right.
So we're unique. We're a laboratory.
Right.
I agree with you. And we become the cautionary tale.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't want your city to be like Gary.
Right.
You know, and so that's the narrative. That's the narrative that they push. And the thing is, the problems that we have in Gary are pretty common to every other city. If you put them in the same conditions under which Gary operates, a city that was dominated by one industry, and that industry evolved to where it didn't need large numbers of people anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so people move away. And so they leave their structures, their infrastructure behind. And so that left behind structures begins to degrade because there's no one to take care of them.
Right.
That would happen anywhere under those conditions. It's no difference than those ghost towns out west.
Yeah.
You know, once the gold rush was done, so were they. That didn't mean that the people that lived in the gold rush towns were poor managers of their resources or didn't know how to govern themselves. It meant the resources, the reasons for that entity existing as a community changed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all that happened in Gary. The conditions under which this community exists as such changed because it was no longer based upon the needs of U.S. Steel.
Right. And don't forget, again, we have the resources. We have 20% of the world's fresh water in our backyard. I don't think people really understand how valuable what we have, what I'm right down the street from in Miller, is Lake Michigan. I guess we continue to let U.S. Steel sit on the majority of our coastline here in the city of Gary, even though they don't really hire too many people from Gary and don't pay the taxes they used to pay, but still.
And you know what else?
Yeah.
Even though they don't even use most of what they own anymore.
Right.
That's why their taxes are lower. Because they claim, they're the ones that make claim, we don't use all these buildings.
Right.
They're obsolete. We don't use them. Therefore, we shouldn't be taxed as if we were using them.
Right. I absolutely agree. And so a lot of the issues that we find ourselves in the city of Gary in, like these types of fights that we're in, the reason that we are a great test case and a desirable city to prey upon is because of the fact that we are in the crossroads of America. You see it when you cross over from Illinois. Welcome to Indiana, the crossroads of America. That's no BS. That's why Amazon. That's why Amazon set up shop here. I mean, we're like the center right here next to Chicago. We are the center of, not the geographic center of the United States, but we've got to be very close to the population center of the United States in the sense that if you look at where we are, we're 3 hours from Detroit, 7 hours from Minneapolis, 20 minutes from Chicago, 3 hours from Indianapolis. I believe 7 hours. I'm sorry, 7 or 8 hours from St. Louis. You look at where we sit, the resources we have.
We're certainly the logistical center of the country.
Yes.
RailNet, RoadNet,
rail networks,
air travel, all coalesces here and travels forth from this area. The reality is, this is desirable real estate. It reminds me of when I lived in Las Vegas. I don't know how familiar you are with the city of Las Vegas, but Las Vegas has a very serious problem. It floods.
Really?
Las Vegas is in a valley. It's like at the bottom of a bowl. And so every time it rains, Las Vegas floods. Except one part. The Old West Side. The Old West Side is where they stuck all the black folk back in the day. Just like here in Gary, they stuck us all in Midtown. And what turned out, the Strip and downtown, pretty much all those wonderful places where black folks weren't allowed to be, those areas are in the middle of a floodplain. And every time it rains the littlest bit, those strip casinos flood. And those downtowns flood. But West Side doesn't flood. Here's another thing about it. Las Vegas pretty much has to get all of its food shipped in. But there's one part of town where you can grow your own food. Guess where it is?
The West Side.
So now, that same situation, the same thing that they did in Las Vegas is what they want to do to Gary. They started trying to push black folk out of the West Side, push them into what they called New North Las Vegas. And they started bringing in other people into the West Side.
Wow.
They want to do the same thing with Gary. There's money to be made in Gary, and they don't want us making it.
Nope.
And I look at this whole takeover of the school district. Look, they took over the school district. MGT gets hired. MGT makes a ton of money. They brought in charter schools. Charter schools are privately owned. Those private owners make a ton of money off of the bodies of our students, of our children.
Right.
It's, Dr. Williams articulates it better than I can. After all, he's got a PhD. I don't. But if you look at it, follow the money, and you'll find the explanation to why we are where we are. It's not all our fault, but it is our fault that we don't recognize that we're sitting in the catbird seat. And of course, there are other people that are very unhappy with that. And they also are very unhappy with the fact that we don't seem to know how to monetize our situation for ourselves to our benefit. And they figure they could do so much better than we were if they were sitting there. So they want us out.
I absolutely agree with that. Rev, you hit the music, so that means it's time for a break.
Yep, we got bills to pay.
And please give us a call, 219-885-1371. That number again is 219-885-1371. Whatever your thoughts are about HB 1187 or about the death of Norman Bailey or whatever, when we come back, we got to get into this new law about handguns. About weapons in America, this new weapons law, and some more stuff about the schools dealing with critical race theory and other controversial topics So please stay with us. 219-885-1371. My name is Sky Cannon. Over there is Reverend Delyn Campbell. We'll be right back after this.